left off last time with just an introduction to this book, Brave New World. And I set it in context a bit of the course as we've run it thus far. And I talked about Paradise Lost and the way that it presents not a utopia, but a vision of earthly life without sin in it. And Milton gives us the account of how that paradise is lost through original sin. And then human history ensues in the light of that act by our federal heads, Adam and Eve. So we're implicated in their sins because man includes all of us. And we also sin because we've inherited their sin nature. And we went through the Enlightenment and saw how the Enlightenment had tried to construct life in accordance with the dictates of reason to create a better world, not then through faith and through the Christian religion, because in large part because of the wars of religion, I think, that were taking place in Europe between Catholics and Protestants. And there was a distaste for the fact that Christians were fighting against other Christians, and in some cases, like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, like slaughtering tens of thousands, and the wars of religion went on for decades, were very bloody. And there was a movement in France, largely, free thinkers and atheists, although it was probably politically rather dangerous to call yourself that in the 18th century, though in France a little less so, to try and construct a society that was based on the dictates of reason and to make progress and use reason to rule over human life without any religious presuppositions. And my critique of that is that there's no such thing as a worldview that doesn't have presuppositions. And if you believe that reason can govern all things, then you have a theological viewpoint, which is that your reason is good and is unfallen and is going to lead you to the right conclusion. So it's a very high view of reason, higher than even the ancient Greeks have, who recognized the problem of the passions and the need for virtues and so forth. The Enlightenment doesn't seem to regard virtues as necessary, and it regards the passions as not even a part of the human nature anymore. Remember René Descartes in his Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is talking about himself as a mental thing, a thinking substance. And he doesn't really, his relation to his body has been described as like a ghost in a machine. His bodily nature is not really him. It's an extension of his mind. And this is the so-called mind-body problem that is inherited by the Western world from Descartes is a real problem. But in French life, there is an attempt in rationalism to try and solve the problems that religion had not. And that goes through various iterations. And to some degree, the second half of this course is showing the outworking of, I would say, bad ideas. And we've gone through the 19th century and seen iterations of this from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in which a man tries to experiment on himself, believing that he's in control of the situation, finding in fact that the monster that he creates, which is what we would recognize as an addict, in fact controls him. And so Dr. Jekyll is not in charge, it's Mr. Hyde who is in charge, because he's indulged in his sinful nature, and now it rules over him. So a take on that in the Heart of Darkness, we saw that applied to Africa. And again, we saw a dystopian view of the Enlightenment project of pure rationalism and control through order and machinery. But here's the most extreme version. And as I say, Aldous Huxley is writing against the utopian versions of his contemporaries. Remember, utopianism and progressivism is I would say, pretty much the dominant view all the way up until 1914. And then the First World War happens, and all the European powers throw themselves against one another, believing that the war that they're about to undertake is going to be swift and they're going to win. and they have to as well because of the survival of the fittest. And they think it's a battle to the death. That's just the way it is. That's biology. And if we don't undertake this, then we are at risk. So we have to push on. And we have to win at all costs. And they push themselves at all costs to win. And you've seen the portraits of this in films now. There's a lot of filmmaking in Hollywood over the last several decades that catalog this terrible war. And this is the seedbed for men like Huxley and H.G. Wells, and more familiar to Christians, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, because Lewis and Tolkien fought in World War I in the trenches, and it changed their whole view of life. But unlike Huxley and Orwell, Lewis and Tolkien responded to this with a Christian vision, with a very different one. I'm not going to look at that here. As I say, I looked at in other courses. Here, we're going to see Huxley, who is a humanist, who is in agreement with his brother, Julian Huxley, who is wrote the Humanist Manifesto, was the head of the Eugenics Society. There, I think, also connected with Planned Parenthood in some way, if I recall. Both of them are eugenicists. They think that eugenics is important and necessary. And in fact, you will struggle to find anyone, if they're not Christian, who does not support eugenics. And even some Christians think that eugenics is a good thing to do. So that it's not a critique of eugenics here per se. It's a critique of the planned utopian societies of men like H.G. Wells and probably his brother. Because these men think that if we just get society totally controlled and under the leadership of the biggest scientific brains, that this will result in world peace. And where the dystopian comes in is not in the actual eugenics at the beginning. You might find that interesting, because most people, and I think this was your response last time, when you first read it, you think, this is horrifying. People are being hatched in labs, and they're being purposefully created into castes. There's the alphas and the betas and whatever, and then there's all the epsilons, and that's not the dystopian side of it. The dystopian side of it is, despite the fact that everybody's happy, it still doesn't work. The leaders, the alphas, fight amongst themselves. That's the dystopian part of it. So it's not just the fact that it's a planned society, because basically Huxley is okay with that, as is his brother, as is H.G. Wells, as are all the humanists in the early 20th century. And as I said, eugenics is practiced in America, in Canada, in Britain, all over Europe, throughout the early 20th century. So the Nazis are not the outlier. They're doing what everyone else is doing. It shocks people. What? The Nazis, their eugenics research, that's not just them, but it's hugely popular in Europe. And it continued after Europe, even though it was considered, eugenics was called a war crime after the Second World War. Because what the Nazis did with their eugenics research was horrible. They were experimenting on people and sterilizing unfit people and murdering races that they regarded as like parasites or viruses. By the way, the Jews were called a virus. Isn't that interesting, in the light of what I said about COVID-19 and the fear of being tainted by the virus of Judaism? Like if you mix your genes, not genes, they didn't have the concept of genes, at least Huxley didn't at this point, but of mixing races would create an inferior species, and that would result in the destruction of Germany. So we got to purify the race as a matter of biological necessity, and it's done at the level of biological war of one race against the next. Horrifying. Now, as I say, this sounds a lot like the narratives of the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade of the 18th century, and the idea that, again, the Africans are people that we can enslave and we don't have to accord to them any human rights. And there is a similarity there, but I would say that this is an intensification of that. So it's worse. It's not better, it's worse. because it regards it as not something that you could do, but that you must do. And that's the way life is. Now, this is the humanist viewpoint, that not all people bear the image of God. And in fact, we don't even know who bears the image of God until the master race emerges, and there's your God. It's the Aryan race or whatever. It's the people that survive. Those are your gods, the next evolution of the species. And the rest, So that's the dystopian part, is that Aldous Huxley sees that even the schemes to try and control everything are going to fail, because the alphas will fight against the alphas. And that's what's portrayed here in Brave New World. By the way, let me say one final thing here. Have you heard of B.F. Skinner in your biology classes? Yes? What was B.F. Skinner known for? Remember, you've been taught different schools of psychology. What does Skinner teach? What's the view called? It's classical condition. Yes, it is. Okay, so he wrote a book here called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. This one, I own this book. And he writes it in 1971, and he argues, and he's a eugenicist as well, and a classical conditioner, and believes that, scientifically managed education ought to ensue, and this is the way, a better world ensues, a well-planned ordered society. He writes this work called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, and he argues that the impediment to the ideal future is these concepts of human freedom and human dignity. They're the impediments because they are connected to virtue. Freedom is how you demonstrate your virtue. You have the freedom to choose the right thing or choose the wrong thing. The conditioners want to take away that choice. We'll choose the right choice for you because we can't afford to let you fail on this. We can't afford to we're not going to cultivate your virtue so that you can decide on an individual basis what the right and wrong thing to do is. We're going to decide that for you, and then we're going to make sure that you agree that that's good and you're happy with it. So he says that these concepts are there in Western literature. Freedom and human dignity are embedded in Western literature, and the foremost exponent of the literatures of freedom and dignity is C.S. Lewis. He identifies him by name, says C.S. Lewis is the foremost defender of the literatures of freedom and dignity, and we need to stop listening to this man. Now, what's interesting, as I said in the Abolition of Man, that work I cited to you last time, this one, Lewis argues that the conditioners are embedded in the education system, and they're getting rid of the idea of virtue. And that's the problem. Because he says education is training in freedom and virtue in wisdom and virtue. That's what education is. Training in wisdom and virtue, says Lewis. The conditioners say, yes, it is, and that's why we need to take over education and not allow for this. We have to debunk virtue. We have to debunk the idea of human freedom and the value and importance of human choices. And if you read Lewis's work or Tolkien's work, you'll find that the choices of the characters are monumental and change the course of the story. And that's the course, I would say that's the case in all of Western literature. The great literature has admirable characters who do the virtuous thing. With huge temptation, they decide that they're going to do what's right. Not what's expedient, not what's going to be beneficial to them immediately, but the right thing. That's what the Bible also teaches. So choose life. You got two paths here. You can go, as it says in Deuteronomy. You can go this way, you can go that way. And if you go that way, it's going to result in slavery, destruction. So choose life. Choose this. As I say, B.F. Skinner wants to take us beyond these choices. He wants to eliminate choice. He wants to condition it out of you. And that's what Brave New World is about, is exactly this, is a world in which the conditioners have eliminated choice by planning in vitro. So they plan the creation of the human race, and they condition different castes, and they give them soma, and they eliminate sexual immorality as a feeling. They encourage promiscuity. Not only do they encourage it on the physical level, but they get rid of all the taboos around it. But their attempt to get rid of the taboos is not quite effective, because even the alphas, and that we meet several alphas in this. So we have Bernard Marx, who's a sleep learning specialist. He's an alpha plus, by the way, who loves, it appears, Lenina Crown, and he wants her to be his girl alone. He doesn't want her to be promiscuous. Lenina's a beta, and she's been trained, and she's your typical beta girl. As I don't mean in today's jargon. She does everything that she's supposed to do. She is promiscuous. She's easy. She's easygoing, whatever. And Bernard is very much attracted to her and wants her for his own. We also have Helmholtz Watson, who's an Alpha Plus lecturer. We have Mustafa Mond, which we meet later. He's an Alpha Plus again. We have Henry Foster. He's again an alpha male. These are all alpha males. They're from the leadership class, but they disagree with one another, and there's a rivalry between even the scientific elite. They're supposed to be in agreement, and they've got rid of the idea of virtue, and they've got rid of resentments and so forth, because they're living in a very happy, planned society. And Huxley portrays that utopian ideal of his contemporaries as impossible. That's the dystopia. It's the dystopia for utopians. So if you happen to be like his brother, Julian Huxley, or this man, B.F. Skinner, and you're planning on a society where everyone's happy, along comes Aldous Huxley and says, well, guess what? We can't even make the alphas happy. So we can have a brief look at this. I looked at chapter 1 last time. It's sort of hard to do a novel in a brief class, but as I said to you last time, it begins in AF 632. It's after Ford. By the way, I thought about this afterwards. It's AF can also refer, later in the book it says that AF also could refer to after Freud. And it's sort of used synonymously with that. And one of Bernard Marx's problems, and we don't meet him right at the beginning there, is that he is a little bit short for an alpha. And that comment is made about that. And he has an inferiority complex, because as an alpha, he should grow to a certain height. And this is the thing, you can identify the various castes by immediate, like one look. They don't do races here. They don't do black, white, Asian. They don't do any of that stuff, but it's more height and athleticism and standards of beauty and so forth. He's not interested in other things. He's just more interested in castes in terms of within Britain, more or less. So he's unusually short. So his growth has been a little stunted. And because of this, he has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He's jealous, he's resentful, because he sees the other alphas as superior to him. And if you watch his behavior, he's a bit of a coward, and a bit of a hypocrite, for that matter. But what's interesting about him, and maybe it's because he's a little bit shorter, he doesn't fit. He doesn't go along with the standard views. So the fact that he's just a little different than the other alphas makes him question whether that is the ideal after all. So he questions communal sports, which everyone participates in, and he questions promiscuous sex. So he doesn't actually enjoy promiscuous sex. It's not that he doesn't enjoy the sex, but he doesn't like the promiscuity. He wants Lenina for himself. And he doesn't even like soma, which almost everybody else takes. He doesn't like it. Doesn't allow him to think clearly. Just sort of puts you in a fog and a daze, makes you feel happy, but he doesn't want to do that. He wants to think clearly about this. And he doesn't agree with the doctrine that everyone belongs to everyone else. So in that sense, it makes him sound like he would not be happy with today's love is love slogan, right? It doesn't matter who you're with and who you love and how, like that's sort of the equivalent, everyone belongs to everyone else is not far from love is love. Yes?
And then you described a lot of the things that he does not go along with the promiscuous sex, but these different things. Could it be said that he's brave in some aspects and coward in others?
Yes. I would say yes, he's brave in certain aspects because he's breaking from the conventions, right? And this is one of the reasons why the other alphas say, you know, maybe you need to get out of here and we're going to send you into exile because you're not fitting in and we can't have dissension in the ranks. Maybe you need to go. So there's a bit of a bravery here. On the other hand, he's not, even though he's in love with Lenina, he doesn't defend her when she's being attacked, right? So, I mean, yeah. So Bernard Marx, so we begin in the factory there where we're creating alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon individuals. And each of the castes is indoctrinated as well. And the indoctrination is almost more important than the physical. By the way, they don't have the idea of eugenics in this day in the sense of genetics. Like they don't understand the role of the gene. It's not been discovered when Huxley writes this. They do understand, however, the importance of crossbreeding and selective breeding, just not at the genetic level. And alphas will have different clothing than the betas as well. So it's not just appearance. They have a uniform that will identify them. And as I say, Bernard Marx is a sleep learning specialist. And this is part of what leads him to disapprove of the methods that are being used to keep citizens peaceful, particularly giving them soma. He doesn't, as a matter of academic integrity, agree with this. He thinks it's wrong. So in a sense, here's a man with a chest. You know, Lewis talked about men without chests and the abolition of man. Here's a man who has a little bit of a moral disapproval of the practice in here. And so he becomes vocal and arrogant in his criticisms even of the status quo. And his boss threatens to send him to Iceland because he's not fitting in. But his friend Helmholtz Watson, also, the reason they're friends is Watson also, although he's an alpha, isn't happy with the status quo. So the people that have the most freedom and are at the top of the ladder are the ones that are the greatest dissenters of the utopia that they're in. So the alphas are almost uniformly portrayed as unhappy with this ideal society that they're on the top of. The Helmholtz Watson doesn't like it because he's a writer, and if there's no battle between virtue and vice in life, there's not a lot to write about. There's no struggle. It's a tedious life in which everybody's happy all the time and fulfilled. There's nothing to write about. If you read literature, it is about the battle between virtue and vice and good and evil and so forth. Whether it's internal or external, those are the subject matters of most of Western literature. But Bernard takes Lenin on a holiday, and he goes on outside of the world state to a savage reservation. That's really interesting. And if you've read, remember I said Brave New World is the phrase is taken from Shakespeare's Tempest, which takes place on a desert island, in which there's one savage there named Caliban. It's not, Shakespeare doesn't locate it for us. It's somewhere in the middle of nowhere, basically. Probably in the Caribbean at the time. Some people have suggested at any rate. And so you have a civilized human being and his daughter who's been exported to a savage place, and that's what's going on here. So you almost need to see the two narratives on top of one another. Here, the savage reservation is in the United States. It's in New Mexico, so in the West, just in desert, basically. And when they go there, they observe that there are two natural-born people. And this is a sort of it's a matter of great interest to them because they don't meet these sorts of people, because these people are subject to things that they don't see in their own world state. They see disease, they see aging, they see multiple languages, and they see religious practices for the very first time. In the world state, there is no religion. It's like John Lennon. Imagine there's no heaven. Well, you don't have to. It's in Huxley's Brave New World. There's no heaven. There's no hell. There's no wars. There's no religion. Everybody's happy except that they're not. And here they go to a place where there are disease and aging and death and multiple languages, different religions. And there are violent rituals. And they meet a woman named Linda, who is a woman that was originally from the world state and was left behind with her son, whose name is John. And these become key characters, unbeknownst to us at the outset. These aren't just two random people. They become central to the story because John, or Linda rather, is the, I don't want to say wife, she's the one who bears the child of whom? Yes, Mustafa Mon, right? So lo and behold, amongst the alphas, the leader of all the alphas, he hasn't followed the rules. He's had a child with a woman. Nobody does this in the world state. And he leaves her over there in his embarrassment. He leaves her behind, and the son that she is his son, he leaves him behind. But what we see regularly is that the alphas desire a world which is not so regulated and so boring as for everyone to be constantly happy and blissful. There's something in their nature which rebels against this. And that's the dystopia. It's the dystopia of utopian schemes. That's what's dystopian about it. No, it's not Mustafa Mon. It's Bernard's boss, the director of hatcheries and conditioning, that had impregnated her. And the reason she didn't go back is because she's ashamed to have got pregnant. By the way, most women in this world can't get pregnant. Like 70% of them are, what do they call them? Free martins. They're sterilized so they can't have children, and only a certain number actually can even. But nobody does because it's immoral to have children. Sort of a taboo. And the son becomes then the central figure because John has been brought up in the wild of the New Mexican desert his whole life, and he's only ever seen this, and his sole access to the world outside of it is his books. And he's got only 2 books. One is a scientific manual, and the other is a book that he inherits from a resident named Popeye, and it's the complete works of William Shakespeare. So the hilarious thing about this man, John, is that he's reading one of the literature of some of the great works of freedom and dignity, those of William Shakespeare, and he speaks in Shakespearean diction, speaks like he's one of Shakespeare's characters, which makes him sort of hilarious because he's a savage, and yet now he's a savage with the noble sentiments of a man who's been reared thinking that Shakespeare's world is the way the world operates. This is the way people really speak. He doesn't know any different. Whereas in the world state, they don't read Shakespeare anymore. So huge irony in this. And John articulates his feelings as if he were involved in a Shakespearean drama. So he's quoting King Lear, he quotes The Tempest, he quotes Othello, he quotes Romeo and Juliet, he quotes Hamlet, and this makes him, amongst the other savages, stick out like a sore thumb, because the savages aren't all reading Shakespeare. It's just John who happens to have read Shakespeare. And so what we get, and this is part of the irony here, is the most civilized individual by normal British standards, the person who is citing Shakespeare verbatim and thinking Shakespearean thoughts, is the one person who doesn't fit in anywhere. And he wants to go back to what he calls the brave new world from which his mother had come. So again, take it as the Prospero and Miranda. She wants to go to the brave new world where those people came from, the world state, and eventually he does go back there. And when he comes back, John meets the director and calls him father. Which in the context of the world state is basically like a swear word, or it's so vulgar that everyone roars with laughter because they think it's a big joke. To call somebody your father or your mother is the equivalent to using a sexual slur. And everyone laughs. And the director has to resign in shame at the result of all this. So it is extremely funny, but it's inverted. All of the expectations of civility and savagery are inverted in Brave New World. So what counts as cultivated and educated is a very distorted thing, and what constitutes the savage is in some ways the most educated individual in the whole work, the man who reads the works of Shakespeare. And when he comes back, though, because Bernard is the sort of protector or the custodian or the guardian of the savage John, Bernard becomes a celebrity because all of the news cameras are following him around. Look, here's a savage in our midst, and Bernard's brought him back with us, and so all the media is following them and giving him attention. And Bernard is thrilled because before he was an inferior alpha, now he's he's on the A list of the alphas. And what's even worse is John doesn't really take much interest in Bernard. He takes interest in Helmholtz Watson because Helmholtz is a literary man and is more interested in literature, just like John is. And of course, that leads Bernard to be characteristically envious and so forth. Whereas Linda, his mother, when she comes back, all she does is, take soma all day long, which she'd been longing for, so she could forget about all her problems. Just like she did before she got into into New Mexico. She used to take soma all the time. Oh, good, I get to be back taking my soma for myself. What's interesting, though, is that John, who's the celebrity here, amongst the, this world state, despises it. He hates it. And he hates everyone there. He thinks they're vulgar. He thinks they're immoral. He thinks the promiscuity is degrading. He thinks the soma is, again, a sign of moral, psychological weakness, refuses to participate in it. And he's more or less a straight-laced man who finds the world of his jailers to be just that. It's a prison in which the prisoners are happy because they're given as much sex and drugs as they want. But he just sees them that way. That's how he looks at them. One final aspect of the plot is that Lenina Crown, remember the beta girl who went with Bernard to the land of the savages at the beginning, she thinks that John is pretty attractive. And she wants to have sex with him as well. And he also finds her very attractive and is very interested in this well. But what he doesn't like is she's promiscuous. He finds that offensive and vulgar, and so he rejects her. Even though he's attracted to her, he doesn't want anything to do with her. Well, you sleep with everyone. I have no interest in you. Even though he's attracted to her, he doesn't want this, and she keeps throwing herself at him, and this makes him angry, and so he beats her in the end because he's this desire. He has desire, but he's disgusted by her, leads to a violent. And of course, the cameras also find this fascinating because this never happens in the civilized society. There is no jealousy. And since everyone belongs to everyone else, nobody ever gets involved in this sort of display. But guess what? Wow, this is great television. Never seen anything like this. So it's like a reality TV show that breaks out. And the police have to come in, and rather than, shooting riot gas canisters to quell the crowd, they shoot soma, disperse it in the air, and everyone knows, calms down, right? Soma spray to pacify everyone. And after this, then everyone is brought to Mustafa Mond, who's the big cheese, the resident world controller for Western Europe. And then he says to Bernard and Helmholtz, okay, you got to go into exile. You're out of here. What's interesting is that Mond tells the men that being sent into exile is a reward. Because here you can be an individual in the land that's outside the New World Order, the brave new world of the one world state. Going out into exile in the midst of the savages, where you can be your own person, that is a form of reward rather than punishment. So in other words, it's a place where freedom and dignity are still understood. So that's when I say it's dystopian, it's dissenting from the perfectly planned utopian society by actually underhandedly or implicitly saying that freedom and dignity are the substance of life. Yes?
Isn't that, in a sense, saying that he views individuality way more than the comfort of civilization?
He does, yes. Individuality, comfort is the lowest standard of human happiness and fulfillment. Yeah, and in this, he would agree with Plato on this. He says, the person who has everything he needs and is happy and has all of his needs satisfied is not the happiest person, because the happiest person would realize that his true fulfillment is found in virtuous things that where there's struggle and where there's a concept of right and wrong, and there's a battle in this. But if everything is just satisfied, this is not what any noble man will ever desire. That's what slaves are happy with. They're happy to have their bellies full and have all of their needs, their physical needs met, but that's not a worthy life for a human being. Yes? 100%. It's just like the Odyssey. That's exactly it. Because remember, when Odysseus we meet Odysseus in book 5 of the Odyssey, he's on the land of, what was it? He's with a nymph, and her name is Calypso. And we don't know where he is, but she is going to satisfy his bodily needs to the utmost. She's giving him not soma, she's giving him the nectar of the gods and something called ambrosia, which is the food of the gods. And if he lives with her, his sexual needs will be satisfied all the time, and he will be given immortal life because he will be given the food of the gods. So he will live forever. He will never die. He will be physically totally satisfied. She's also he's more beautiful than any woman in the world. And he is desperate. He doesn't want to stay with her. He wants to get back home to his wife who's aging and is going to die like him. He chooses that life over the woman who satisfies all of his carnal needs. So it's the same sorts of issues that are arising, yes. And again, as I said, when we did the Odyssey, it matches on very neatly to the vision in the book of Proverbs, where we have two women. One, the adulterous woman, just like Calypso, and then we have the virtuous woman, and you say, follow the virtuous woman. Well, Penelope is the virtuous woman. And so we see in Odysseus the model of a virtuous life, and he has to, withstand all sorts of temptations to be satisfied with that, which a lower and a lesser man would be satisfied with. No, he's going to make sure he gets back home. Yes?
This reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen Demolition Man.
It rings a bell, Demolition Man. Tell me about it. Yes.
And there's one side that follows all the rules, and then there's the other people that are living kind of on the outskirts.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. I can't remember it that well, but I have seen it, and I remember thinking it was pretty good as well. Yeah, I mean, basically really good film literature plays with these themes. And to be a virtuous human being, to be a fulfilled human being, is not having your bodily needs met. You need your bodily needs to be met. If you don't have food and clothing and shelter and so forth, you're going to struggle to survive. Okay, fair enough. But the purpose of human life is not survival like an animal. It's there's the side of human nature that recognizes justice and injustice and virtue and vice and good and evil. That's the substance of a human life, because we're made in the image of and likeness of God, and God is good and he hates evil. So if we want to be fulfilled, then we will do likewise. We want to follow the light and scorn the darkness. And where Christianity comes in is they see the darkness not outside of us, but it's even come within us. Like the human heart is very dark, and it needs to be the light to purify it and restore us to our native righteousness, which we only get through the cross. So that's the basic plot there, but interesting, Mustafa Mond tells Helmholtz that exile is a reward because the islands are full of the most interesting people in the world. These were individuals that didn't fit into the social state of the men like H.G. Wells and B.F. Skinner, the planned, conditioned world. Interesting people actually think for themselves. And my aim as an educator at Tyndale, in general, is to try and create individuals. Not herd animals. B.F. Skinner and his ilk seem to me to want to create herd animals with themselves as the herdsmen. And at the end of the book, Mustafa Mond outlines for John what led to the present arrangement and his argument for the current state of affairs. So you would say, okay, well, Mustafa Mond, if you think that the world of exile, where there are all these individuals there, and this is the most interesting, fulfilling life, why do you even bother with a caste system and a managed society and so forth? And John asks the question, and Mustafa Mond responds to him, and John disagrees. Says, I have the right to be unhappy. So what we have in Mustafa Mond is a man who is somebody who has good intentions for other people and is going to judge for them, act as if it was his job to determine everyone else's life. That's Mond's summary of John's view, by the way. He says he demands the right to be unhappy. And he says, can I go to the islands too? And Mon won't let him go because he wants to see what happens to John next. In other words, there's an experiment going on here, and this is really interesting to me. I'm going to take a man like you from the land of the savages, and we're going to pluck you into this world, and we're going to watch and see what happens to you. And what he does in the midst of this promiscuous, vulgar, decadent world, John decides to retreat to a lighthouse and try to become an ascetic. And he whips himself. He's mortifying the flesh, like in a medieval monastic tradition. He sees himself as corrupt. He sees the society around him as corrupt. He retreats from the society and he flagellates himself. And this gets caught on camera, and then the reporters gather around and they can you keep doing this? And they're filming, watching him, mortify the flesh and hitting his back with a whip. And crowds come to watch this man doing something other than to fulfill all of his pleasures. It's like, this is the craziest thing we've ever seen. We can't stop looking at this. It's live streamed across the world. And a documentary comes out about it. And then John again gets fame for this. And then a woman comes along, and I think it's Lenina. She sees him because she's seen the man that she really desires on film, and she wants to join him. And then he turns the whip on her, starts whipping her. And of course, the cameras are rolling. It's like, this is great. And Soma is shot out, and then an orgy ensues, which John participates in as well, and then he hangs himself in shame. That's the end. Because the orgies all over the newspapers. Well, orgies happen every day. Yes, but this one didn't have just an orgy. It had all sorts of whipping and flagellation, and this crazy man, this famous John, and now he's not only whipping himself, he's whipping her, and everyone's whipped into a frenzy. And again, he's the only one disgusted by this. He hangs himself because he's of the shame of becoming like the people he despises, and the rest of them are just entertained. And that's the end of the story. It's so cheerful. Look, this is not supposed to be. It's a dystopian fiction, but it's a dystopian fiction in the sense that it is rebuking the outcome of utopias. Even though he believes in eugenics, he still thinks utopian schemas are invariably going to fail because the elites themselves are not above the problems that they're trying to place us beyond. There's something within these elites that is going to desire and still has a sense of freedom and dignity that's going to rebel against this. By the way, H.G. Wells, when he reads this, writes a response to it, critical of it and reasserting the utopian. No, if we just do this, everyone will be happy. And B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist psychologist, likewise thinks that if we just follow the social sciences prescription and psychologically condition everyone will really be happier in the end. So we just need to get rid of these ideas of freedom and dignity. And the way we'll do this is we'll stop reading great books. If you stop reading great books, you won't want the freedom and dignity that they talk about as the substance of a virtuous life. Just stop reading them. And so they did. They don't read them in high schools anymore. They read garbage. You don't read the Bible? Used to read, everyone in Canada used to hear scripture read in the public schools when I grew up over the PA every day. Said the Lord's Prayer, sang God Save the Queen, had scripture read. I was in the public schools. Now they don't read the Bible, and they don't even read great literature. Even Shakespeare's starting to drop out of the curriculum. They still do literature, but it's not literature that promotes freedom and dignity. It's literature that promotes identity group perspectives, which might contain freedom and dignity, but really they're not interested in that. It's more just different perspectives. as if that were good in and of itself. Something wrong with a different perspective, but a different perspective that promotes an idea of good is what I'd be interested in, not just a different. Different doesn't say anything. It can be different and unedifying. Anyway, comments or questions on this? I've skipped over this I've gone through a whistle-stop tour. Yeah, but you hate this book, but why do you hate this book? I understand why you hate it in one sense, but what do you mean you hate it? Graphic. It is the point. That you want to identify with and you see as a heroic in some way? Of course you do. He might be it. Because he's the individual in the midst of a massive conformity. He's the individual. So you want Bernard Marx to be that hero. And at first you think he is that guy, right? Absolutely. And we'll find the same thing in 1984, by the way. Winston Smith is the rebel who is not fitting in with the machine. And the machine it's quite clear that the machine being portrayed is horrid. And the fact that he is willing to stick out and try and fight against him, yeah, we are immediately on his side. But then we see Bernard, So it's very dispiriting. It's the same thing as Marlowe in Heart of Darkness, right? Like we start off on his side, and then over the course of time, we're thinking, I'm not sure about this guy, and I can't really trust his judgment anymore.
There's no good, moral, good character. Everybody's morally incorrect.
Yes, but and I agree with you, which is why I don't like the fiction of the age. And I don't like the 20th century as a century for literature, because it's led by humanistic values. And the humanistic values are unedifying. They're inhumane. They deny moral goodness and moral evil. They say that they're categories that don't apply. They deny the life of virtue. They ridicule it. They portray a life that's beyond those things. They show promiscuity. It's an age of decadence. But that is the 20th century. You may not like it. I don't like it. But it is 20th century literature. And I've been trying to teach the course, and I have taught the course roughly chronologically going up to the present. And I've said from the beginning, I like the older literature much better. And it's richer, and it really speaks to issues in a way that, even though it's written thousands of years ago, it seems very contemporary. It seems to be realistic to life. Life really is about the battle against temptation, of virtue against vice, of good confronting evil, of a great odyssey, the pursuit of wisdom in being able to discern truth from falsehood and so forth. That seems to me a realistic portrait. Whereas the 20th century is realistic in a different sense. It's like a photograph that takes a picture of what's there, but there's no selection to say, but this is virtuous and this is vicious, this is right and this is wrong. It's just whatever you want. It's a chaotic worldview. But that's humanism. That's the world of the psychologists. Yeah, go read. So the great works of the 20th century, if you read them and you had a list of them, and they would be put out there by the establishment, this would be on and so would 1984. Lord of the Rings would not be on that list. But if in the year 2000, when I was still in the UK, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings was voted by the populace as the great work of literature of the 20th century. Twice. 2 different polls. And the literary establishment were furious. And just sort of shows how bad the taste of the nation is, that they prefer the Lord of the Rings to these, wonderful works of literature like this, or James Joyce, or all the stuff that you read as things that you really ought to like if you're educated. I actually think people's tastes are less corrupted than their sophisticated conditioners would have it. They did, and I think they still do. I'm not sure about Brave New World. Definitely 1984. But when I went to high school, we read both of them back to back, just like I'm presenting on this course. No, we did. Yeah, but what more persuasive? Like when I did it was in the middle of the Cold War, which was Russia versus U.S. and Ronald Reagan, Mikhail Gorbachev, Star Wars. The threat of nuclear holocaust, Armageddon. And the idea of a totalitarian state where life is controlled, vigorously with the jackboot crushing dissent. Well, that seemed to describe the Soviet Union. But life behind the Iron Curtain, whereas in Canada, North America, it's the free world against the communist world. Seems more like 1984. But then if you look at Brave New World, I'm thinking, but hold on, but Brave New World seems a lot more like Canada. Oh, no, it is.
What is your proof that Brave New World is a lot like?
People are promiscuous. They are happy with eugenics. They don't care about euthanasia or abortion. Yes. So I'm not talking about Canada versus the US. I'm saying North America is more like Brave New World. Yeah, I'm not talking about Canada versus US. I'm saying where people are satisfied with really superficial entertainment. They have as much material goods as to satisfy their pleasures. They take the equivalent of soma, whatever that is, recreational drugs, or some sort of psychological medication to handle their depression, moods, whatever. And they don't actually ever question or seek to live a virtuous life. That seems actually a pretty accurate description. No, you will not read anything happy in my course. Absolutely, you will not. No, I mean on this course you will not read anything more happy. It's going to be doom and gloom for the rest of the course. But it's an intro to Western literature, which began with Homer and it will end with 1984. It's chronological. It shows the progression over the course of time. It's to introduce you to different worldviews. Ours is the humanist worldview. That's what we live in. I'm trying to show you what it is. You may not like it. I don't like it. I think that should be clear. I don't like it. I'm just saying it is what it is. And here's how we need to look at it. And so if you don't like it, well, then make it better. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to try and make it a better world. But I'm teaching literature, and literature is portraying it in this way. And this is a particularly, I think, effective way of displaying a world where, although it purports to be utopian, there are some cracks in that portrait. Yeah. Yes. Yes, sir.
I like in the beginning of the class you said that not all people bear the image of God. Only people who survive have the image of God.
Well, I don't think that's what they think.
That's what they think. But that view is distorted because people that bear the image of God will be the survivors at the end in the afterlife, right? But to them, they're thinking on this life, on this earth.
They think that bearing the image of God is something they can control and something that they can also define. So the people that don't bear the image of God are the inferior races, the inferior peoples, or the subhuman people that have not yet become human, like the young people that have not yet attained rational moral capacities. So you can abort the young, or you can even, and this is the proposal of a Princeton bioethicist, Peter Singer. He thinks that you ought to be able to kill children if they're handicapped and so forth to relieve their misery, to alleviate the misery. Because they're not, and the reason is they're not yet fully human, and you're sparing them the unnecessary pain of growing up with all the, if they have some sort of a physical, mental handicap, whatever, and you're alleviating their suffering. He argues for this as an ethicist, and what he's then doing, though, is saying that those people are not yet human. Okay, so the category of the human is being defined by the bioethicists. They think that we can determine what human beings are. And human beings then become not a category that includes everybody that is born and not even born, everyone that's been from the embryo onwards. That would be a human being that bears the image and likeness of God. But according to Skinner and according to Singer, it would be the people that have achieved a certain intellectual development and moral development. Those are the people that bear the image and likeness of God. And the rest of them are subhuman. And then what you do with the subhumans, well, you try and prevent them from having children, for one thing, to get rid of their gene pool, or just to kill them off. Especially if they become too cumbersome and expensive. That's an outcome of eugenics. Yes?
The flip to the same point, I've listened to a podcast where society killed the disabled because they're detriment to the entirety of civilization, not just because they're not humans, but like by having them, it would seem that the society as a whole is weak, and you have to take resources to be giving. Can that be like kind of the same thing, or is that more sociological in the sense that?
I mean, it's the logic of taking and killing handicapped people, let's say, or whatever. It can vary. The issue is, what does it mean to be a human being? What is a scriptural view of human nature? What does it mean to bear the image and likeness of God? It says in Genesis 1, it says that Adam and Eve bear the image of God. They say, so God created man, in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Right? That's the reference. And that idea of bearing the imago Dei seems to have, it's not clear what it means there, but it's applied to human beings, and it's not applied to the animal world, for instance. And it's not applied to the plants, not applied to what we will call the environment. They don't bear the image and likeness of God, and they don't have human rights then. We can't give animals human rights because there's something about animals. And what it seems to me, and you have to tease this out, and I said this when we looked at the Genesis text last semester, one of the things that we note about God is that God separates, night and day, land and sea and so forth. So there's just making distinctions. And when he does it, he calls it good. And so goodness matters to God. It's part of his value system. And so if we bear the image of God, then goodness should matter to us as well. So we have a moral nature, in other words. And animals don't. Animals don't have a moral nature. When your dog bites you when you try and take away his food dish, he's not a bad dog. He's just a dog that acts like a dog. You're taking away his food and he's going to bite you. You might be unhappy about it, but he's not a morally corrupt dog. We just use the word bad because we don't like it. Right? But it's not, you don't actually think is that a corrupt, immoral dog. He hasn't been trained, or you've done something stupid as a human being. Well, you've stuck your hand in his food dish, tried to take it away while he's eating and he's hungry. That's a stupid man, not a bad dog. But we call it a bad dog, but we don't actually think that the dog is morally corrupt. Whereas when we think of people, we know that they have a moral nature. And that's why when they do something wrong, we say, that's not fair to them. We say, that's not fair. And we expect them to understand. And every child on the playground knows what not fair means because they know what right and wrong is. And they know that they have violated it. And the children know. It's part of human nature. So that's definitely one aspect of the bearing the image and likeness of God. It's not about development. It's about nature. It's not stages of development. Yes, of course, a little baby is not the equivalent of a human being on one sense, developmentally, maturation, whatever, but has the potential inherent in it and the dignity of a human being that we ought to protect. Because weakness and strength is not the measure of human nature. And our contemporaries of the humanist variety think that it's power that distinguishes the gods from the non-gods. The more powerful you are, the more human you are, the more godlike you are. That's the lesson of the Lord of the Rings. The ring of power. The more you see yourself as a god, and the less you see other people as worthy of life, and the more you think that you have power to exercise domination over them. Any other comments or questions? I don't know if you... I like your moral distaste for this. It's healthy. I'm not objecting to that. I was never expecting you to like this in the sense of read the story and feel good about yourself or feel good about the world being portrayed. It's been put on the course because the 20th century is closest to our century. It's a significant period of that will reflect the worldview of our contemporaries more. Remember, over the 20th century, the Western world becomes less and less Christian, more and more committed to humanism. Julian Huxley goes on to found UNESCO. The guy who writes the Humanist Manifesto, the head of the Eugenics Society, Malthusian, population control, all that, founds UNESCO, and humanism and the UN and all of its mandates are there to bring about a humanism without religion and without moral good, moral evil, and to try and get rid of the battle between nations by getting rid of religions and moral systems and create a sort of a very humanistic way of looking at things. So this is a good way to critique the UN and its vision of a brave new world. Yes. Yes. I'm just pointing out that, so I don't want to get into the discussion of the UN here per se. I'm just noting that Julian Huxley, Aldous Huxley's brother, who writes the Humanist Manifesto and is the head of Eugenics Society in the UK, and is involved in, awarded by Planned Parenthood and so forth, and is on the Malthusian Society, is the founder of UNESCO, the first head of it. So you can make of that what you will, but the UN may be a little bit more suspicious than you think. It's not as Star Trek would have you believe. It is unfortunate. As a Canadian, you think the UN is the counterweight to everything evil in the world, namely the US. That's what you're taught. If only it were so simple.